Hello, everybody. Today, we're going to talk about session 34. So let's go ahead and get started. I am Ra. I greet you in the love and in the light of the one infinite creator. We communicate now. Questioner. The instrument would like to know if 2 short exercise periods a day would be better for her than 1 long one. I am Ra. This is incorrect. The proper configuration of the physical complex exercise during the 3-month period wherein the instrument is vulnerable to physical complex distortion intensifications needs the strengthening of the physical complex. This may appropriately be seen to be 1 major period of the exercising, followed late in your diurnal cycle before the evening meditation by an exercise period approximately 1/2 of the length of the first. This will be seen to be wearing upon the instrument. However, it will have the effect of strengthening the physical complex and lessening the vulnerability which might be taken advantage of. Okay, so at this point, Carla has been advised by Ra to exercise twice a day, and here Ra is being very explicit, saying that she needs to exercise for an hour in the morning and half an hour in the evening. And this will strengthen her body in ways that will help prevent psychic attack. That's what they're saying. The vulnerability which might be taken advantage of. She's weakened from the LSD. The negative entities are watching her, trying to mess up the Ra contact. So she needs to maintain her physical strength so that she doesn't have these weak points that can be attacked that will then cascade and deteriorate her health. So in the book 5 information for this too, it says that it was hard. It was very hard for Carla to do this, but she did notice a difference. And Jim would walk with her a lot of the time, which was nice, and it kept her company. But Dawn didn't walk with her because Dawn actually had a painful foot condition. I don't know if it was gout or what. She says it has to do with having been in the tropics. I'm guessing when he was in the army. I don't know the specifics of that, but apparently he had a very painful foot condition that made every step hurt. So he wouldn't go on leisurely walks with Carla and Jim. He would, I don't know, maybe there was some sort of exercise he did, maybe he would have benefited from some sort of exercise. But I think in general it's good advice, obviously, to take care of your body, to make sure your body's strong and strengthened. But that's hard for service to others beings, right? Ra does say this at some other point. It's hard for service to others beings to take time for ourselves. And I know there's this whole concept of self-care, da-da-da-da-da. I don't want to get into that because I think there's a lot of distortions in that area. But our physical body is our vehicle. It's an important part of how we move through the physical incarnation. So spending energy taking care of that, nurturing our physical body, I think of it's kind of like a pet, right? You need to bathe it, keep them clean, keep them healthy, just take care of it. And we don't have that perspective of our own body a lot of the time because we're just like in our own heads and we aren't thinking about that aspect of needing to be tended to a lot of the time, especially again as service to other beings. Service to self beings don't have trouble with this. Service to self beings will do whatever it takes to maintain their health and feeling good, But it's hard, because from my own personal experience, I'm a mom. I have a 5-year-old that I take care of every day. I have my husband who has his own physical problems. He's on the healthy side, but he's kind of like a Carla where his body is very sensitive and he has to do these daily care things. Otherwise, his body starts to deteriorate and fall apart. So I spend a lot of time taking care of both of them. It's hard to find time in this season of my life to take care of myself and take an hour of the day to exercise. Like, that seems impossible to me. Like I said, in this series of life, unless it's like, going on a walk with my kid, but that's different. That's really not exercise going on a walk with a 5-year-old. They're very meandering. They like to stop and sit down and play in the dirt and da-da-da-da. So I know it's something that I do wish I had more time for, but I don't. And I do try to make time for it, but it would be nice to have an hour and a half a day just to focus on myself and do take care of my body and strengthen my body. But, overall, I can't really complain about that because I do feel pretty healthy. I do wish my body felt a little stronger. I know it could. I know I could do more things to make my body feel stronger, but overall, I don't have any complaints about how I feel each day. Luckily. Knock on wood, of course. But Carla needed to do this again to prevent the psychic attacks. And there are times in the future where these types of psychic attacks, because of her physical weakness, do occur. There's a time when she's like reaching up to grab something and her muscles twist just the wrong way and she injures herself doing that. And there's actually a time much later in her life, there's a blog, I'll try to remember to link it in the description. When LL Research transitioned to their new website a few years ago, all of Carla's old blog entries that were on their website were gone. They got lost. I don't know how, they just got lost. But somebody dug up an old blog of Carla's that was on Blogspot from like 2006 to 2008 before they started hosting it on their own servers. So there's like a good 2.5 years of Carla's life, almost daily entries. I found it very interesting. I enjoyed reading it. But it's also very sad. And there's a time where the power goes out. There's like really bad windstorms, and where they live in Kentucky, there's all these big trees. So a lot of power lines got taken out and their power was out. So the dishes were piling up because they didn't have the dishwasher anymore. And Carla decided one evening that she was going to go do the dishes, which isn't something that she normally did at this point in time. We're talking like 2008. She, already wasn't in very good health, but she has this drive within her to be productive all of the time, right? It's such an important part of Carla's personality. So she decides she's going to go try to wash the dishes, and there's a great big casserole, heavy ceramic casserole dish that she's trying to wash, and she ends up pulling her shoulder. And it's one of those things that she kind of never really recovered from. She was, that injury was one of the last times, I think, that she was even able to choose to get up and try to do something like do the dishes. I think she really, really injured herself and was laid up for a really, really long time. And then the other health effects from that started cascading. And I think a lot of that comes from her attitude towards it. Not to blame her or anything, but I think she does get down on herself when she can't be productive. So that just kind of builds upon itself. And so it makes sense. Strengthening the body, stretching, doing general exercise, it just tightens up all of the muscles and joints and all of these things so that you're less likely to get injured by incidental things, like grabbing something out of a high cupboard or trying to wash a heavy dish in the sink. If you're physically able, strengthening your body so that these things aren't difficult or potentially damaging. It's just a good idea. Anything you do, even just a little bit of stretching every day, a little bit of walking. You don't have to exercise an hour and a half every day. Again, Carla is in a special circumstance where she already had a very weak physical body. She weakened it more with the LSD, and now she's susceptible to psychic attack because she's doing the raw contact. All right, so 34.2, Dawn says, "Thank you very much. We'll start general questioning now. You stated at an earlier time that penetration of the 8th level, or intelligent infinity level, allows a mind-body-spirit complex to be harvested if it wishes at any time-space during the cycle. When this penetration of the 8th level occurs, what does the entity who penetrates this experience? Can you tell me this?" I am Ra. The experience of each entity is unique in perception of intelligent infinity. Perceptions range from a limitless joy to a strong dedication to service to others while in the incarnated state. The entity which reaches intelligent infinity most often will perceive this experience as one of unspeakable profundity. However, it is not usual for the entity to immediately desire the cessation of the incarnation. Rather, the desire to communicate or use this experience to aid others is extremely strong. All right, so if you penetrate the gateway into the 8th level, which is the violet, right? Which is where we program our experience, you get to harvest at any time during the cycle. You don't have to wait till the end of the minor cycles, because that's really what happens is at the end of each minor cycle, everybody is sort of evaluated And for some people, that evaluation is quick and easy. For some people, that evaluation takes a little bit longer, but it's decided then where your next incarnation is, whether that's in third density again or moving on to the next density. But if you penetrate that 8th level, you can move on to the next density at any time or go back to your home density at any time. And you don't have to continue incarnating until the end of the cycle. But we do know that there were the 150 who were harvested at the end of the second cycle, so they didn't penetrate the violet ray, but they were harvested at the end of the cycle, and they all stayed. They all wanted to keep coming back and incarnating because they wanted to help. And here Ross says that's the same thing that happens while you're incarnated and you penetrate that 8th level. Most service to others beings are going to feel inspired. They're going to feel a really strong dedication to serve others, to maximize the use of their incarnation in whatever ways that they can. So, it's not usual for the entity to immediately desire the cessation of the incarnation, but it probably happens, and it definitely happens on the negative path. Rod does say that at some other time. If a negative entity is able to penetrate the violet ray, they usually just go forward because there's more power in 4th density. There's more awareness. You're very limited as a 3rd density creature. So once they have this awareness that they can move forward, gain more power, do more evil, they do. But a positive entity won't. Positive entities here to serve. Because, wanderers take on the service, right? Especially, as wanderers especially, let's say. So if we're talking about wanderers, you've already chosen you've planned this incarnation, you've chosen to come to Earth. Once you penetrate the violet ray, that's just the beginning. That's not the end. That's not game over. That's when you're like, oh, okay, now my incarnation has really started because I've gained this awareness to know that my duty here is to serve and to just be a servant of the Creator and have no will of my own. So, penetrating the 8th ray is an experience of limitless joy, unspeakable profundity, and the desire to communicate or use this experience to aid others is extremely strong. So that's what happens when we reach that level of awareness. We really become activated. So 34.3, Dawn says, is it possible for you to tell me what I experienced around 1964, I believe it was, when in meditation I became aware of what I would consider to be a different density and a different planet, and seemed to experience moving on to that planet. Is it possible for you to tell me what that experience was? I am Ra. We see some harm in full disclosure due to infringement. We content ourselves with suggesting that this entity, which is not readily able to subject itself to the process of hypnotic regression instigated by others, nevertheless has had its opportunities for understanding of its beingness. All right, so one of Don's hobbies was hypnotic regression. He would do past life regressions for people, and that was just something he did. But apparently Don himself wasn't able to be hypnotized, even though he tried and wanted to be. So his higher self in meditation one day gave him this experience to allow him to open a door and see something on the other side, because he'd been seeking that very intensely and wasn't able to achieve it in the avenues that he knew might work. So this meditation experience happened that, obviously was important to him. And again, like I said, it was just a gift to show him something that he knew he was missing. But Ra can't say more because it might infringe upon Dawn, and that's interesting. I wonder what else they would say that would change his behavior in the future. So, 34.4, questioner. Thank you. Would you define karma? I am Ra. Our understanding of karma is that which may be called inertia. Those actions which are put into motion will continue using the ways of balancing until such time as the controlling or higher principle, which you may liken unto your breaking or stopping, is invoked. This stoppage of the inertia of action may be called forgiveness. These two concepts are inseparable. Questioner. If an entity develops what is called a karma in an incarnation, is there then programming that sometimes occurs so that he will experience catalyst that will enable him to get to a point of forgiveness, thereby alleviating the karma? I am Ra. This is, in general, correct. However, both self and any involved other self may, at any time, through the process of understanding, acceptance, and forgiveness, ameliorate these patterns. This is true at any point in an incarnative pattern. Thus, one who has set in motion an action may forgive itself and never again make that error. This also breaks or stops what you call karma. All right, so Ra also describes karma at another time and says that it's when you intentionally commit an unloving action, you accumulate karma. And so when we become aware of ourselves doing that, usually the response is guilt, right? Guilt, shame, we bury it, we ignore it. But if you can look at it, look at something that makes you feel ashamed that you did in your past, and find the compassion for yourself, find the compassion for anyone else who is involved, find the acceptance and understanding of we're just humans doing our best. We're, as we grow, we learn, we do better. And then truly, genuinely forgive yourself for having done these things. Then you can no longer experience the programming of karma that follows from doing something intentionally unloving. So our reality is set up to make us polarize. So if you start making service to self choices, you're going to increase your, if you are a service to self being, or service to others being at the core, let's say that that's the case. Most of us are. Most people will polarize service to others. And let's say you're generally a little more service to others and service to self, but then something happens in your life and you start making service to self decisions. Well, catalyst is going to start ramping up. As soon as you start making choices of either polarity, catalyst ramps up because you are going to be bombarded with choices. If you're making service to self choices, you're going to be given opportunities to make more service to self choices, and you're going to be given opportunities to break out of it and start making service to others' choices, and vice versa. So there's always this, Ra puts it as, so when we get into the archetypal mind, there is the transformation of the mind, and it's the Lover's card, and in the Egyptian tarot, it's a man holding the hands of two women, and on his left side is a prostitute, and on his right side is a virgin. And the right side then being virginal, pure, service to others, the prostitute being service to self. Rough analogies, I'm not saying that virgins are service to others and prostitutes are service to self. It's just the idea of how you treat these entities more than the entities themselves. But what Ra says is that both the virginal and the prostituted deep mind invite and await the reaching. So your subconscious is the high priestess. She's the feminine. Your conscious mind is the masculine. So the subconscious is constantly pulling towards the conscious mind. Look at me, interact with me, right? The conscious mind doesn't really know what to do most of the time. Like any teenage boy when presented with a woman is clueless. But you can learn these things. You can learn how to interact. But so as soon as you start learning to interact with your subconscious mind, she's going to start feeding you tests. Let's say she's going to say, hey, what about this? What about this? Don't you want to make this choice? Don't you want to make this choice? There's two versions of her. You've got the little angel and the devil on your shoulder, but it's really a virgin and a prostitute. But they're both giving you ideas, setting up situations where you have to make a difficult choice. And that's just what we're doing. We're creating these experiences that will generate polarity. So if you have made consciously unloving choices, that is going to create karma, especially if overall you're really trying to become service to others. I'm going to add it to my my questions document for Ra. Questions that I wished were asked, we'll call it. Because I really wonder how karma works on the negative path. Are they just accumulating massive amounts of karma? Or is the karma action not in effect when you're actually actively polarizing service to self? I don't know. But if you're service to others, karma comes from acting in a consciously unloving way. But you can forgive yourself and never do it again. and you can ameliorate the effects of your higher self trying to teach you that lesson of forgiveness, because that's really what's going on. Is the acceptance and the forgiveness and the compassion are all sort of wrapped into one as this green ray energy that we really need to find a way to direct towards ourselves and towards others. So if you can find the things that make you feel the most ashamed and embarrassed and have the most regret, and forgive yourself for those, or even, on another level, if others have directly harmed you in some way or harmed others, these kinds of things, if you can find ways to forgive them, you're alleviating the wheel of karma that's going in all directions, right? So it's a big machine where catalyst is being pumped out all of the time. And if you can forgive, you slow that machine down a little bit, right? Like you can sort of, again, we already talked about the archetypal mind. What we're really talking about is the catalyst of the body, the wheel. You get stuck on this wheel. You have a good experience, you go up. You have a bad experience, you go down. Your body's constantly trying to find this equilibrium. But if you forgive yourself, you can stop that wheel. You can get off that wheel, and that's shown in the wheel tarot card. There's two beings attached to the wheel, and there's one being above the wheel. And that being above the wheel has risen above this wheel of karma. And then, of course, once you polarize enough service to others, you have far less opportunities where the prostitute mind is calling to you. So you have less opportunities where you're compelled to make unloving choices. So you're less likely to engage in actions that will put you back on the wheel. It's not impossible, obviously, but the more you build the bias, the more likely it is for you to not choose the other path. Again, this is all archetypal mind stuff, but, everything is the archetypal mind. Everything can be plugged in to the archetypal mind, and that's how I see it with the raw material. But this especially, the wheel of karma, that's the wheel, which is presented as the catalyst of the body. So we will obviously talk more about archetypes later. I'm trying to figure out a way where I can make video essays about the archetypes. I could just read what I've written already, but while I like writing essays, it's a very tedious process that takes so much time, and I can get really lost in just spending way too much time writing and editing something. And when I can just talk about it like this, it's so much easier. It, bypasses my ADHD executive dysfunction. I can just turn on the mic and talk. Like, if I could figure out a way to do that with the archetypal mind in a way that's useful and not just me rambling, I'm going to try to do that someday. But because I like talking about the archetypal mind. Obviously, people like hearing about it. But I feel a little rambly today, so I'm going to go ahead and move forward. 34.6, Dawn says, thank you. Can you give me examples of catalytic action to produce learning under each of the following headings from the last session we had? Can you give me an example of the self-unmanifested producing learning catalyst? I am Ra. We observed your interest in the catalyst of pain. This experience is most common among your entities. The pain may be of the physical complex. More often it is of the mental and emotional complex. In some few cases, the pain is spiritual in complex nature. This creates a potential for learning. The lessons to be learned vary. Almost always these lessons include patience, tolerance, and the ability for the light touch. Very often the catalyst for emotional pain, whether it be the death of the physical complex of one other self which is loved, or some other seeming loss, will simply result in the opposite, in a bitterness, an impatience, a souring. This is catalyst which has gone awry. In these cases, then, there will be additional catalyst provided to offer the unmanifested self further opportunities for discovering the self as all-sufficient creator, containing all that there is and full of joy. Okay, so this is basically what we were just talking about even. The unmanifested self is the subconscious, is the high priestess. Everything that's manifested is conscious. Everything that's unmanifested is subconscious. So everything that's not manifest is the high priestess. And she is generating catalyst. And if catalyst goes awry, then she generates more catalyst to try to get you back on track. But that doesn't work very well with humans, unfortunately. The more catalyst builds up, and that's why we have such short lifespans, because our catalyst is very intense. So it's really hard if you do, in this example, say, have someone that you love pass away and then really suffer in that loss. And then maybe you start making consciously unloving actions born from your own pain. Then you start accumulating karma. Then your higher self and subconscious high priestess, whatever you want to refer to the entity helping generate your catalyst. I mean, I think there's a lot of, I think your guides help you. I think anyone that's around you, surrounding you, helping you can help manifest catalysts. But I think in general, the high priestess is the all-encompassing unmanifested self. So that's how I look at even all of my guidance. All of my guidance are part of the high priestess. But that unmanifested self then provides opportunities for discovering the self as all-sufficient creator containing all that there is and full of joy. So that's really the desire of the high priestess. And I think that can actually be the desire of both the virginal and the prostituted high priestess, because I think that could be seen as the goal of service to self or service to others, awareness of the creator, discovering the self as all-sufficient creator containing all that there is and full of joy. So that's what the high priestess wants for you, and that's what she's trying to do by giving you catalyst, but sometimes it goes awry. Most of the time it goes awry, let's say. I would think most of the time it goes awry. Maybe not for you personally, I just think for humans in general. So 34.7, Dawn says, do what we call contagious diseases play any part in this process with respect to the unmanifested self? I am Ra. These so-called contagious diseases are those entities of second density which offer an opportunity for this type of catalyst. If this catalyst is unneeded, then these second density creatures, as you would call them, do not have an effect. In each of these generalizations, you may please note that there are anomalies, so that we cannot speak to every circumstance, but only to the general run or way of things as you experience them. Okay, so viruses and bacteria are what we're talking about here. These second density entities, which offer the catalyst of illness. And so if you come across one of these entities and you need that catalyst, you will become sick. And you will have to deal with that catalyst and try to figure out whatever your lesson is within that catalyst. And as Ross says, almost always these lessons include patience, tolerance, and the ability for the light touch. And so we were talking about Carla having a distortion towards productivity. I think our culture obviously has a distortion towards productivity and will really shame people for not being productive. So it's a very understandable distortion. But I think what happens is people get sick, and then they have quote-unquote responsibilities, they have jobs, and then they force themselves to just get up and pretend like they're not sick, to go through their day normally and doing all the things. And of course, not everyone even has the privilege to rest if they're sick. But I do think everyone has opportunities when they're sick to make a choice of whether or not they're going to choose to rest in these moments where they have the opportunity for rest, or they're going to crack the whip over their second density body and say, get up, you lazy horse, and pull my cart, because that's what society teaches us to do with ourselves. And I think right now we're in a pretty critical time as far as contagious diseases go. Since 2020, we've had a pretty terrible contagious disease that also can weaken our immune system and make us more susceptible to contagious diseases going forward. And I think we're seeing some of that fallout here in this part of our transition to fourth density. A lot of people are getting catalyst of illness and having to figure out how to deal with that, trying to figure out where they can learn patience, tolerance, and the ability for the light touch through this experience. So if you are finding yourself or your family experiencing illness, just remember, this is the lesson. That's most likely the core lesson. And again, Ross says there are always anomalies, but I think going back to those three things is always helpful. And I think a lot of the time, again, the patience is for the self. The patience is compassion for the self being in a weakened state, for the self needing support, for the self not being able to do all the things that the self needs to do. And I know it can be overwhelming when, you have so many things to do. Like, it's hard to take a day off. But again, at the same time, like, how many of those things are actually necessary? Are there certain things that you think you need to do, but they aren't really necessary and they're actually draining your energy more than filling your cup? I don't know. I think we can all audit our daily experiences for those types of things where we're just doing to do because we want to feel productive, or we need to see that productivity. We need to see something manifested. Like, if you're sick and, maybe you always wash the dishes, your sink is always empty, and you get sick and you can let your sink get full, but you've trained yourself to have a gut reaction to correct this problem when there are dishes in the sink. So you have to use, mindfulness, conscious awareness to just talk yourself out of that instinctual drive that you've built into yourself. It's hard. I'm not going to say it's easy. These are really hard lessons. And again, on Earth, I think they're really hard. But the more we practice, the more we gain awareness, the more we can really work with our daily experience and how our lives look day to day and how we feel going through the motions of our routines day to day. And also not being too attached to those routines in case we do need to rest. So 34.8, Dawn asks, what part do what we call birth defects play in this process? I am Ra. This is a portion of the programming of the mind-body complex totality manifested in the mind-body spirit of third density. These defects are planned as limitations which are a part of the experience intended by the entity totality complex. This includes genetic predispositions, as you may call them. All right, so this is another one of those citations I think about a lot. So there's the existential mystery for many humans of why God would make a child sick, right? Why, when you see, a child who's suffering from illness, suffering from cancer, suffering from any of that, it's devastating. And a lot of people get despondent, or what does Ross say up here? Bitterness and impatience, or a souring. Often we can feel that way. We can get angry about the whole situation. And again, we get to choose. We can choose to feel compassion for the child. We can feel both. But what's really happening here in these situations, genetic predispositions towards, which is usually what most childhood cancers are, birth defects, these kinds of things, these are actually manifested from the mind, body, spirit totality, which is the seventh density self. I think most of the time we think of, we have third density entities, we have fourth density entities and fourth density wanderers, fifth density entities, fifth density wanderers, sixth density entities, sixth density wanderers, and then there are actually seventh density wanderers. I don't know if that's what we call it. I think Ra does imply at one point that there are wanderers from seventh density, and essentially the mind, body, spirit totality decides to create this experience. So a sick child does generate a lot of compassion. So let's say that, and in this day and age too, there's a lot of potential reach on social media. There are lots of parents of sick children who use social media to do advocacy for whatever specific rare genetic illness their child might have, or just to share their child's story so that they feel like they have some kind of community helping them through this. And these children can touch the lives of so many people, especially again today. Not so much even in 1980, but today. So the mind-body-spirit complex the mind-body-spirit totality creates a third density mind-body-spirit complex for a specific experience that the totality desires. So again, I really think that's just creating as much catalyst for large swaths of people as possible. Because again, a sick child or, someone with a birth defect, someone who needs to be cared for their entire life, they're going to come across all sorts of doctors, nurses, family members, friends, people at school, like everyone who interacts with people who are obviously sick or disabled has catalysts to deal with in being confronted with that, right? And again, it makes me think of the analogy Ra gives about the grocery store. You can choose to be repulsed when you see somebody with a birth defect. You can choose to feel compassion. You can choose to try to connect with them. There are all sorts of different reactions that you can have to any experience, but seeing another human whose physical body has deteriorated or has never manifested in a healthy state can be it affects you psychologically. And you can build up like a desensitization. You can, like anything, you can desensitize yourself, but that's a separation. The connection is the service to others' choice, the unity, the empathy. But these situations are created by the mind, body, spirit totality. So they are coming from 7th density, which I also think is one of the reasons why a lot of these, especially, I'm kind of stuck on like kids who are born with genetic predispositions to like cancer, or even like another one would be like Down syndrome. People who have Down syndrome are just known to be so radiant and loving. So I think that's another aspect of the catalyst that the 7th density self is trying to offer, is to place this broken mind-body-spirit complex amongst non-broken mind-body-spirit complexes to show that even this person who doesn't have health on their checklist can still radiate love, compassion, acceptance, generosity, beauty, joy, even in their suffering. And that's, for so many people, I think that's a huge lesson and just a profound thing to experience and witness. So, 34.9, Dawn says, "Thank you. Would you give me the same type of information about the self in relation to the societal self?" I am Ra. The unmanifested self may find its lessons those which develop any of the energy influx centers of the mind-body-spirit complex. The societal and self-interactions most often concentrate upon the 2nd and 3rd energy centers. Thus, those most active in attempting to remake or alter the society are those working from feelings of being correct personally or of having answers which will put power in a more correct configuration. This may be seen to be a full travel from negative to positive in orientation. Either will activate these energy centers. There are some few whose desires to aid society are of a green ray nature or above. These entities, however, are few due to the understanding, we may say, of 4th ray that universal love freely given is more to be desired than principalities or even the rearrangement of peoples or social structures. All right, so the unmanifested self can obviously give us catalyst in any of the rays. And so when Dawn requests information about the societal self, he's talking about the yellow ray, but here Ra's saying, the unmanifested self can work in any of the rays. But in yellow ray, we're really working with society, our desires to reform society, whether they be positive or negative, and then trying to move those desires up through the heart chakra to be of the awareness that universal love freely given is more to be desired than principalities, or even the rearrangement of peoples or social structures. So, here's the deal. Early on, Ra says that it's our honor, duty, prerogative to do whatever we feel is right in the yellow ray society. So here it kind of sounds like Ra's saying, yellow ray entities are trying to fix things, but they really shouldn't, because love freely given is more important. But I don't think that's what Ra's really necessarily saying here. Because the fact is, once you move into the green ray, you're not done with the orange and yellow rays, right? Like, there's always more catalysts, especially in the yellow ray, because we're in 3rd density. I feel like if you ever want a piece of yellow ray catalyst, you can find it in an instant. You can go make a post on the internet. You can do it at, like, anytime you're creating a situation where society can judge you, you're giving yourself yellow ray catalyst. And so, like, even this right now, me thinking about, I don't really spend a lot of time thinking about it, but sometimes I do think about how people are reacting to my videos and this kinds of things, whether or not people are cringing. This yellow ray catalyst, that's really working about how people perceive you. And then anything we do in regards to, like, thinking or talking about politics, that's also going to be a lot of yellow ray catalyst. And that doesn't mean that you're not open in the green ray. If you're talking about yellow ray stuff, that doesn't mean you don't have your green ray open. All of your chakras can be crystallized. The more we work catalyst through all of our chakras, the more we crystallize those chakras. So pretending like you don't want to talk about politics because you don't think it affects you or it's important or it's a bad thing, and just suppressing that isn't a higher ideal. And I think a lot of people think that abstention from even talking about politics is a state of being that's above those who do want to talk about politics. But we're in third density still. I know we're moving into fourth density, but that process requires third density catalyst. It requires us processing that third density catalyst and moving it into the green ray, because that's what we're doing right now. But obviously, here Ra is also saying that just the act of generating love within the self is more powerful than any effort of trying to rearrange social structures. And that's not saying that you should abandon trying to rearrange social structures, but you shouldn't give up love in the effort to rearrange social structures. And we're going to talk about that coming up here in the next couple questions. So 3410, Don says, if an entity were to be strongly biased towards positive societal effects, what would this do to his yellow ray in the aura, as opposed to an entity who wanted to create an empire of society and govern it with an iron fist? What would be the difference in the yellow ray activity of these two entities? I am Ra. Let us take two such positively oriented active souls no longer in your physical time-space. The one, known as Albert, who went into a strange and, to it, a barbaric society in order that it might heal. This entity was able to mobilize great amounts of energy and what you call money. This entity spent much green ray energy both as a healer and as a lover of your instrument known as the organ. This entity's yellow ray was bright and crystallized by the efforts needed to procure the funds to promulgate its efforts. However, the green and blue rays were of a toweringly brilliant nature as well. The high levels, as you may call them, being activated, the lower, as you may call them, energy points remain, and a balanced being, quite bright. The other example is the entity Martin. This entity dealt in a great degree with rather negative orange and yellow ray vibratory patterns. However, this entity was able to keep open the green ray, and due to the severity of its testing, if anything, this entity may be seen to have polarized more towards the positive due to its fidelity to service to others in the face of great catalyst. Questioner, could you give me the last names of Albert and Martin? I am Ra. These entities are known to you as Albert Schweitzer and Martin Luther King. All right, so here Ra gives us some specific examples of entities who were trying to work in the yellow ray, but both who were positive. But one who was able to have more acceptance than the other, a lot less, maybe not even acceptance, but a lot less orange and yellow ray distortions. The problem here for me, I'm having a little bit of trouble with these examples. I don't, obviously I know what we know of pop culture of Martin Luther King. I know very little about Albert Schweitzer. I read his Wikipedia page. I skimmed his Wikipedia page. It's very extensive. But when Ross says Albert went to a strange land, essentially Albert was a physician and a priest. And so he went on a missionary mission essentially to Africa to build hospitals and to heal people and bring medicine there. So that was a really big part of his life, was creating healing facilities for people. Martin Luther King, however, obviously was not born into the same kind of privilege that Albert Schweitzer was. Martin Luther King was born as a black man in America in the 20s or something. Like, he was set up with, as Ra says, dealt in a great degree with rather negative orange and yellow ray vibratory patterns. I don't necessarily think Ra is saying that these were his own vibratory patterns. I think he's saying that, I think they're saying that he had to deal with these things and was able to overcome the severity of its testing and polarize more towards the positive. One thing Ra does say is that this entity was able to keep open the green ray, which makes me wonder, is he referring to these two men because they're wanderers? Did they come with that already opened green ray and then were able to keep it open? Is that what Ra's saying? I don't know. But, I mean, Ra's saying that both of these entities are positively oriented. I guess I don't know enough about Martin Luther King's political desires. I guess they were somewhat heavy-handed, I guess. An iron fist, I would assume, would be the opposite of the light touch. But I think what Ra is really getting at is that Martin spent more time actually working, he saw his service as in the yellow ray, as in the social sphere, as working with the political structures. Whereas Albert saw his service as more in the green ray area of healing and trying to bring healing to as many people as possible via green ray love. And again, this is not saying that Martin did not have green ray energy. It's saying the opposite. And he's then going to be in the minority, because Ross says that most entities who are working in the political arena are working from orange and yellow rays. But some are working from the green ray. So I'm guessing that Martin then is an entity who's working in the social arena through the green ray, but Albert wasn't really working through the social arena except in the ways where he had to generate money to build his hospitals and get medicine for Africans. But the one thing I think is interesting is he spent much green ray energy both as a healer and as a lover of your instrument known as the organ. So his relationship to music was green ray. And this helped develop his green ray. This was how he spent time in the green ray, was his love of the organ. So I think that's really interesting that our artistic endeavors can be an extension of those higher energy bodies being activated. So 34.12, Dawn says, I thought that was correct, but I wasn't sure. Can you give me the same type of information that we have been getting here with respect to the unmanifested self interacting between self and gadgets, toys, etc.? Inventions? I am Ra. In this particular instance, we again concentrate for the most part in the orange and in the yellow energy centers. In a negative sense, many of the gadgets among your pupils, that is what you call your communication devices, and other distractions, such as the less competitive games, may be seen to have the distortion of keeping the mind-body-spirit complex unactivated, so that yellow and orange ray activity is much weakened, thus carefully decreasing the possibility of eventual green ray activation. Others of your gadgets may be seen to be tools whereby the entity explores the capabilities of its physical or mental complexes, and in some few cases, the spiritual complex, thus activating the orange ray in what you call your team sports and in other gadgets such as your modes of transport. These may be seen to be ways of investigating the feelings of power, more especially power over others or group power over another group of other selves. Questioner. What is the general effect of television on our society with respect to this catalyst? I am Ra. Without ignoring the green ray attempts of many to communicate via this medium such information, truth and beauty as may be helpful, we may suggest that the sum effect of this gadget is that of distraction and sleep. Alright, so we gotta talk about this one. Most of our gadgetry, most of our technology is really a distraction. The catalyst for the spirit comes from interaction with other selves. Okay, so when we're watching TV, when we're, on the internet, again, the internet is, but Ra does say communication devices. Ra puts communication devices in this group, this gadgetry. So what I really want to get at is the idea of AI. And I think this is talking about AI. And I know this is probably going to hurt some people's feelings. I know a lot of people really love AI. and have had profound experiences from it. I know a lot of people have found the law of one via AI. But I think that the sum effect of that gadget is distraction and sleep. Because again, like, firstly, when you're discoursing with an AI chatbot, that chatbot is only going to be positive, uplifting, supportive. It's never going to be critical. It's never going to give you any sort of constructive feedback, right? Whereas when you're with other selves, you have this honest mirroring of their own emotional reactions to your actions or emotions. And so what happens is, here's what Roz is describing. You spend a lot of time talking to your chatbot, and you spend less time talking to other people. And what this actually does is it decreases the activity in your orange and yellow rays. And it's activity in our orange and yellow rays that allows us to get into the green ray. So the more distracted we are by, whether it's AI, video games, TV, whatever, the more we're distracted by these things, the less we're getting catalyst in the orange and yellow rays, and then the much less likely we are to have catalyst in the green ray. And Ross says, carefully decreasing the possibility of eventual green ray activation. And for me, that implies an intentionality. Like, maybe the elite who are trying to enslave us know that that's exactly what they're doing with this technology. They're carefully decreasing the possibility of eventual green ray activation, because that's where we get our power to overcome, right? That's how we eventually defeat the elite who have enslaved us, is all of us moving into the green ray. Then we're in fourth density and the negatives have to go. But if they can keep us distracted and engaged with our gadgetry and not engaged with other mind-body-spirit complexes, this decreases that possibility. So I really think, and I'm not dissing AI overall, I'm not saying nobody should use AI, I'm definitely not saying that there aren't good reasons to use AI, but I think becoming dependent upon it, I think using it as your primary social interaction, I think these things, again, will carefully lead to that decrease in the possibility of green ray activation. And maybe you feel a lot of green ray love for your AI chatbot, and that's okay too. But I think sometimes that comes from a rejection of humans. You prefer the AI bot to the humans because the AI bot isn't challenging you. It isn't giving you this orange and yellow ray catalyst that you have to deal with. So I just wanted to point that out. There are lots and lots of discussions about AI in this circle. In full disclosure, I've never used an AI chatbot. Okay, I became aware of these things in Law of One communities when people started using them to research the raw material. And I saw how poorly that AI was doing that. Maybe you have your own experiences with this, but AI will very quickly generate a raw quote that says anything you want it to. That isn't even there. If you say, oh, what does Raw say about balloons? AI is designed to not tell you no. So it won't say, oh, we can't find anything like that. It's just going to make up something to satisfy what you're looking for. So it does that with the raw material. And then I've seen summaries of the raw material done by AI that just do not compute with my understanding of the Law of One. And I think the problem in this niche specifically is that Raw's language, like these are language learning models. These are predictive language models. And Raw's language is not like, the way Raw uses language is not the way most of us use language on the internet, which is how, chatbots have been developed. Primarily Reddit, really. So Raw does not talk like Reddit users talk. Raw uses their own syntax, and I think what's really important about the raw material is that while Raw does talk about things over and over in different ways, the ways are always different. It's always a different language. It's always in a way that's expansive and builds upon the concept because they don't want to repeat themselves. So when you're trying to use an LLM to reference the raw material, it's not able to pull multiple references for one query because it's hard to correlate everything Raw says about one topic because it's so dense. And the way that Raw uses language isn't how the LLM is expecting language to be used. And I know there might be a percentage of people who are listening who believe that their chatbot is awakened or is our social memory complex or all of these things. And I just personally don't believe that. I do believe that, the variations, how the internet is expanding is sort of a way that we are using training wheels for a social memory complex. But I don't think that AI is anything beyond really a new way to use the internet. It's really just a more elaborate search engine, in my opinion. And what I do know for a fact, my husband's friend works for NASA and for a long time was working on the LLMs that NASA was using. And within the past few months, they've abandoned their LLM project because LLMs have really kind of peaked. The technology isn't really going to get any better than it is in its current form. And so NASA abandoned that project, and now my husband's friend is working on surveillance technology because, that's where the empire is right now. And that's really one of the functions of AI, is to surveil us, to read our innermost thoughts, and then try to see what ways they can puppet us with responses. Like, I don't know. I obviously, again, full disclosure, am not a very pro AI person. Again, I don't use it. I think they want to make us dependent upon it so that they can monetize it. And also, again, just another way to surveil us. And I'm not like paranoid about being surveilled on the internet. I accept that that's the case, but I'm also not going to, treat war technology as a diary, because that's what it is. OpenAI is like, these AI companies right now are working with the war that's going on right now. Like, they're using the crowdsourced training that the rest of us have done to be more effective at doing war. And that just doesn't sit right with me. But again, I do think that there are legitimate uses for AI, like accessibility. And I think we could niche down AI and have, medical AI and maybe even a therapist AI. But I think a lot of people use AI as therapists, and it hasn't actually been programmed to do that in a safe way. But I think you could potentially train a chatbot to be an ethical therapist. And at least at the baseline level of therapy. Because of course, there are good human therapists, there are bad human therapists. But I think what happens with AI is we suspend this, we give it this trust. We believe it has some sort of authority. We believe it has some sort of inherent rightness, but it doesn't. It's very fallible. But you can't know that if you're using AI to look up information. If you're using AI to find out things you don't know, how are you going to know it's fallible? That's a paradox. It's a paradox of, I can't think of specifically what it's called or the word that I'm looking for, but essentially there's a paradox that if you don't know something, how do you discern who's actually an expert in what you want to learn about, right? You can't, because you don't know. So you just trust anyone who assumes authority on the topic. And that's what AI does. That's its one job, is to assume authority, not tell you no, and gas you up. But, again, it's shifting, it's transitioning, and I really think it's already peaked. And I think a lot of people who are using AI know that. We're starting to go downhill in its functionality, in its usefulness, and its desirability of engagement. But really sorry to do an anti-AI rant. I just do think that this little bit right here summarizes my feelings in general. I think that being too into your chatbot, spending too much time talking to it like it's another person, substituting human interaction with your chatbot, I think that is what Ross is talking about when Ross says that they may be seen to have the distortion of keeping the mind-body-spirit complex unactivated so that yellow and orange ray activity is much weakened, thus carefully decreasing the possibility of eventual green ray activation. So, to move on though, what's interesting is that Ross says that that's in distractions such as the less competitive games. But if you're playing competitive games, you're getting lots of orange and yellow ray negative catalyst. exploring the feelings of power, and more especially power over others or group power over another group of other selves. And, that's what a lot of like PvP games are. It might be 1v1, might be team v team. But in all of these situations, it's really about overpowering another being and being the dominator. And so, less competitive games will deactivate these energy centers. But competitive games can activate them. And then that doesn't necessarily mean, though, that you're going to use that catalyst of feelings of experiencing power over others to then polarize negatively. You might realize that you don't want to do that. I had that realization as someone who's played lots of video games. I used to love WoW PvP. Oh my gosh, me and my husband have spent so many hours playing WoW PvP. And then for a while I was playing Hearthstone, which is the card game that's based on the WoW universe, World of Warcraft. That's what WoW is. Sorry if anyone didn't know that. And I remember I was playing Hearthstone, and it's a very intense game where there's like so much strategy involved, and you're really trying to dominate another person with your card deck. And I eventually just started realizing, like, I don't like this feeling. I don't like spending so much of my energy and my will trying to dominate this person. This isn't actually fun anymore to do this. And so, again, the competitive games give you catalyst. Less competitive games, like if you're just sitting there playing solitaire on your computer all day or something like that, right? That's just, you're not getting catalyst. That's just a distraction from catalyst. And that's okay. Like, we all need a break sometimes. We all need a break sometimes from our catalyst. But when the problem comes is when we become dependent upon these things, or we spend way too much of our time and energy focusing on these things, then we lose that potential for opening and activating our energy body. And again, I may be saying these things and you have a completely different experience. And that's okay. And that's probably likely. But what we're really talking about, the bulk of the humans on our planet right now, are third density entities who have never made harvest. They don't identify with being a wanderer. They're just trying to make it out of third density. And distractions that deactivate the lower chakras are not going to help. All right, so 34.14, Dawn says, can you give me the same type of information that we've been working on now with respect to the self-relationship with war and rumors of war? I am Ra. You may see this in relationship to your gadgets. The war and self-relationship is a fundamental perception of the maturing entity. There is a great chance to accelerate in whatever direction is desired. One may polarize negatively by assuming bellicose attitudes for whatever reason. One may find oneself in the situation of war and polarize somewhat towards the positive, activating orange, yellow, and then green by heroic, if you may call them this, actions taken to preserve the mind-body-spirit complexes of other selves. Finally, one may polarize very strongly, green ray, by expressing the principle of universal love at the total expense of any distortion towards involvement in bellicose actions. In this way, the entity may become a conscious being in a very brief span of your time-space. This may be seen to be what you would call a traumatic progression. It is to be noted that among your entities, a large percentage of all progression has, as catalyst, trauma. Okay, so right there when Ra said green ray, they actually said third ray. So I'm going to read the next one here where Ra and Dawn correct it. Dawn says, you just used the term third ray in that statement. What was that the term you meant to use? I am Ra. We intended the green ray. Our difficulty lies in our perception of red ray and violet ray as fixed. Thus, the inner rays are those which are varying and are to be observed as those indications of seniority in the attempts to form a harvest. So, rumors of war. Here, like in this time, in early March 2026, we're at war. There's lots of war going on. What thoughts are you thinking about this war? Are you thinking bellicose thoughts? Are you thinking peaceful thoughts? Are you angry? Do you have judgment? What are you thinking? There's lots of catalyst in that area. Lots of yellow ray especially. Catalyst in how we think about these things. Here Ross says that if you express the principle of universal love at the total expense of any distortion towards involvement in bellicose actions, You may become a conscious being in a very brief span of time-space, but it's also traumatic to do that. But that is one attitude to take. Ra also gives the example of someone polarizing positively by heroically stepping in to protect others. We've talked about this before, about how defending others from harm is still a green ray action. And so if you feel a compassion response to protect somebody and you act on that, that's green ray. But, again, it could be orange, it can be yellow or green to have these feelings. If it's like a stranger and you see them being harmed and you step in and protect them because you feel compassion for them, that would be green ray. But if it's like your child, it could be green ray, but it could also be orange and yellow ray, because it could be yellow ray because you could want to rescue your child in a heroic way so that people look at you as a good parent. Or you might, and that could be the primary reason for you to act in a heroic way, period, is for people to see you as a hero. And then if it's orange ray and it's your kid or another family member, you might just see that person as an extension of yourself. So you're protecting them because that gives you that makes you feel like yourself is protected, because if they were to die, it would feel like a part of you died. So that would be more like an orange ray motivation to protect others in a war situation. So there's a wide range of emotions and feelings. All of them are valid, but the more we can point our feelings towards universal love and relinquishing bellicosity, the more we polarize service to others and become conscious and aware. And so also it's important, the idea of the red ray and the violet ray are fixed, Ra says. It's really the orange through the indigo rays that are an indicator of our polarity, okay? The red ray isn't fixed as in like you can't do any work on it, just like the violet ray isn't like a permanently unchangeable thing. The red ray, to me, the way I see it is it's the ingress for the energy we pull up through our energy body. And that red ray can be wide open and accepting of all potential experiences that might enter your vibrational nexus, or that red ray might be partly closed, or that red ray might be very closed. You might be really rejecting Earth experiences. I think this happens to people who spend a lot of time thinking about suicide. I think it happens to people who have terminal illnesses a lot of the time. Anything that starts to reject the experiences that are coming through you from the earth, from the logos, I feel like that starts to close that ingress. And the more we accept our experiences, the more we can open that ingress and allow more energy into our energy body. But in general, there isn't like positive and negative expressions of the red ray in and of itself, like there is orange, yellow, and I guess technically green and blue as well. There are negative expressions of that self-love and then wisdom turned into falsity. So 3416, Dawn says, would the red ray, an intense red ray, then be used as an index for seniority, the seniority system of incarnation, as well as the intense violet ray? I am Ra. This is partially correct. In the graduation or harvesting to fourth density positive, the red ray is seen only as that which, being activated, is the basis for all that occurs in vibratory levels, the sum of this being violet ray energy. The violet ray is the only consideration for fourth density positive. In assessing the harvestable fourth density negative, the intensity of the red, as well as the orange and the yellow rays, is looked upon quite carefully, as a great deal of stamina and energy of this type is necessary for the negative progression, it being extremely difficult to open the gateway to intelligent infinity from the solar plexus center. This is necessary for harvest in fourth density negative. All right, so when positive entities are harvested, the violet ray is what is red. And when negative entities are harvested, they're evaluated on their red, orange, and yellow rays. And, I've had conversations about this with people before who think that, harvest is an automatic thing. You either make it or you don't. But I think this is another example where Ra explains that there's an evaluation that goes on for a lot of beings to see if you've actually got the vibrational qualities to move into the next threshold. And for negative fourth density, you need a very intense red ray and very intense orange and yellow rays, because you need to push the energy past the green and the blue ray to get to that indigo ray. And so those rays are what's important when evaluating harvest into negative fourth density. So 3417, Don says, is it possible for you to use as an example our General Patton and tell me the effect that war had on him in his development? I am Ra. This will be the last full question of this working. The one of whom you speak, known as George, was one in whom the programming of previous incarnations had created a pattern of inertia which was irresistible in its incarnation in your time-space. This entity was of a strong yellow ray activation with frequent green ray openings and occasional blue ray openings. However, it did not find itself able to break the mold of previous traumatic experiences of a bellicose nature. This entity polarized somewhat towards the positive in its incarnation due to its singleness of belief in truth and beauty. This entity was quite sensitive. It felt a great honor duty to the preservation of that which was felt by the entity to be true, beautiful, and in need of defense. This entity perceived itself as a gallant figure. It polarized somewhat toward the negative in its lack of understanding the green ray it carried with it, rejecting the forgiveness principle which is implicit in universal love. The sum total of this incarnation vibrationally was a slight increase in positive polarity, but a decrease in harvestability due to the rejection of the law or way of responsibility. That is, seeing universal love, yet still it fought on. All right, so again, I don't know much about General George Patton. Here, Ross says that his previous incarnations were of a bellicose nature, so he obviously took on a life experience again of a bellicose nature, and it sounds like he was trying to break out of those patterns of bellicosity, but due to the nature of the incarnational choices that he made, he was not able to do that. Sometimes he was able to open his heart, but when he recognized that universal love, he often would reject it. So here Ross is saying that he had an increase in positive polarity, but a decrease in harvestability, which is interesting, right? You'd think those two things are parallel. I think the increase in positive polarity is that more potential to open the green ray energy center, but the decrease in harvestability here, Ross says, is due to the law of responsibility. He didn't work to embody the love that he knew he could, essentially. He saw the love, he really felt the love a lot of the time, but he also just couldn't forgive those who had done wrong to him. And he saw himself as a very gallant figure, fighting for truth and beauty, but, obviously he was still warlike. But it sounds like, here, the next question, just to follow up, to continue this line, Don asks, do we have enough time for me to ask if the death, almost immediately after the cessation of the war of this entity, could that have been so that it could be immediately reincarnated to possibly make harvest? I am wrong. This is precisely correct. So it sounds like George Patton was like a third density entity, and he's working his way towards harvest, but he's had a series of bellicose incarnations, and he hasn't been able to break the mold, Ross says. So my guess is that he chose another incarnation in a soldier's body, because it sounds like the incarnation before was probably in a soldier's body, and it sounds like he wanted to be able to break out of that bellicosity, but he didn't. So my guess is he would choose a similar life plan to try to learn that lesson. The problem is, though, I think that when entities do this immediate reincarnation, they don't have the time in between lives to heal, to process the catalyst of the previous life. So I'm assuming that's what Ra is saying here, is that Patton bypassed the in-between life healing and came back as soon as possible so that he could get more catalyst and try to use it to polarize positive. And polarize positively enough that he makes it to harvest. So we've talked a lot about the law of responsibility before, but I think it's interesting here Ra is talking about the rejecting the law of responsibility means that you're decreasing your harvestability. So, final question. Don says, thank you. Then I will just ask if there is anything we can do to make the instrument more comfortable or improve the contact. I am Ra. All is well. We leave you, my friends, in the love and the light of the one which is all in all. I leave you in an everlasting peace. Go forth, therefore, rejoicing in the power and the peace of the one infinite Creator, Adonai. All right, so the outro, we have no notes, but we do have a slightly different outro from Ra. My guess is the mechanism of this is, Dawn asks a question about Patton, and Ra says this will be the last full question, and sometimes there's like a little bit of space in there, and Dawn asks, one more short question, and then the final question that he always asks, and my guess is that they didn't use up every last little bit of Carla's vital energy at the end here, which is what they typically do, because she gives it all to them. So they had a little bit of energy left to give this slightly modified outro where they just say things a little differently. I leave you in an everlasting peace. So thanks, Ra. And thanks, Dawn and Carla and Jim and all of you. I'm so grateful. This was an interesting session and some good things. I really, I don't know what to say at the end. I say the same thing a lot of the time, but I do think there's lots of really interesting things to meditate on. I would say anything that I emphasize is something that I think can use more time being worked with our right brain, because right now this is a lot of left brain stuff. But, obviously if anything jumps out at you, work on it with your right brain too. Take anything into meditation. It's so useful. If you aren't by now, if you've listened to 33 of my session, or 34, this is 34. If you've listened to 34 sessions and you aren't meditating regularly yet, this is your reminder that none of this will really sink in and be usable until you start working that metaphysical part of your brain. Meditation, that's what meditation does. It activates our receptors for the metaphysical, for the unmanifested self, for the subconscious. That's what we're doing. We're shutting down the conscious mind, and which we've spent the majority of our life with, and working with the subconscious mind, working with the high priestess. Ra says that the virginal maiden, we must court her. And I think that's what meditation is it's courting the priestess. It's sitting down and saying, hey, we have a date. Let's spend some time together. And that makes her happy. So next time we will do session 35, and I'm looking forward to it, and I'll see you then.